my buddy Mike says to me, he goes, why don't you just lose? I looked at him and I said, what do you mean? Why don't I just lose? Because I figured I had two options. Resign under protest or do nothing, not go to the hearing and get fired. And keep in mind, I got little kids at the time.
Right, absolutely.
I got a huge mortgage to pay and there's no way I can quit.
So you threw the game.
So I decided to throw it. And he goes, just lose. And I looked at him, I said, when I charge somebody with a crime or when I do something in a courtroom, man, I'm in there to win.
Yeah,
not today, I'm in there because I believe that what I'm doing is justice. I charge a guy with a homicide because I believe he's guilty. And I threw this hearing because I believe these guys were not just not guilty, they were factually innocent and were not involved in that homicide.
What's up? We're back, part 2, with former Manhattan DA District Attorney Dan Bibb and my co-host Bill Cannon up here in Ossining, New York. And we had a nice chat the first half, I thought.
Dan can talk, man. He's got all these DA war stories. We thought cops were the only ones that told war stories, but
he's got them, man.
As we used to say, I can hit the narrative long ball.
That's great.
That's
man.
a good one. I like that. So
you can steal it if you want.
I'm going to write it down. Give me a couple seconds here. Bill, you started telling us a homicide story on the break, and I said, you know what, save it for. It's a funny story.
Yeah, it's like one of those stories that you can't believe that it actually happened. A guy goes into the 2-5 precinct to turn himself in for a murder that he committed 15 years earlier, and he starts telling the woman behind the desk all the details of the murder, and she says, "You're in the wrong precinct." She goes, that happened in the 2-3. She goes, the 2-3 is on 102nd Street between 3rd and Lexington. So the guy walks to the 2-3, tells them, they go, yeah, they send him upstairs to the squad. Billy Dunn is there. And sure enough, he did a murder 15 years ago. He knew all the facts. He's now doing 25 to life.
Oh my God, it's hard to believe that.
No, I believe every word of that.
Civil service.
Everybody rises to their own level of incompetence.
That's right.
So you're in the DA squad. We talked about this earlier. You're living on the Upper West Side, playing in the DA basketball league, having a couple of beers every day after work, and hitting homicide cases, man. Trying homicide cases.
When did you make
This
chief?
is what movies are made about.
Yeah, but when did you make chief? How long did it take you to make chief?
I never made chief.
No, I mean, excuse me, Senior Trial Counsel. How long did it?
Well, it took me a while.
How many people stay?
There were a couple of checkered episodes in my past that the office wasn't too fond of.
Well, this is where the show is built around. Your show is built around this right now. Those little stories that keep holding you back slightly, but you're the most competent guy there at some point.
Well, I took a collar, so.
You did?
Yeah,
No way.
For discon.
Get the fuck out.
Got a summons.
What, at a protest or something?
No, I was on the PATH train, actually.
Wow.
Going home after.
Some guy had the window open?
Going home after a party for somebody who was leaving, and the Port Authority cop, took offense to some words I had with the conductor. Decided I was being disorderly, dragged me off the train, cuffed me up, dragged me inside. And as he's walking upstairs, we're on the escalator, and I said, he's got me cuffed up pretty tight, and he's jerking the handcuffs around. And I said, that kind of hurts, man. Can you not do that? I said, and besides, I'm in law enforcement. And the guy goes, oh, shit. And I said, my shield and ID are in my back pocket. And I had a pair of jeans on. And he pulls it out, and he looks at it, and he goes, oh, shit. So we go into the police room by the PATH station, and I was actually going out to my parents' house to pick up my car to go down to Jersey Shore the next morning. And, I'm there and they had to call a captain from Jersey City, where their command is. And the captain comes in and says, are you calm now? Looked at him and said, Captain, I've never been anything but calm. I said, the police officer evidently objected to words that I had with the conductor. And I was even calm during those words with the conductor. And he goes, well, we're going to write you a summons. I said, for what? What did I do? And so the cop, I remember his name, Frank Smircich. The cop writes me a summons for discon. And, of course, on the back, you're supposed to put some factual allegations about what you actually did that made you disorderly. He conveniently left that blank because I hadn't really done anything disorderly. Of course, I had to go. That was Friday night. And I ended up getting out to my parents' house instead of getting out to my parents' house about midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning, I got there around 7. And my mother is panicked because I told her I'm coming to pick up my car and going down the shore on Saturday morning. My mother's panicked. I haven't called her. I just looked at her and I said, I'm getting in my car. I'm going down the shore. I didn't even tell them that I had just taken a collar. But Monday morning, I'm in the office at 8 o'clock waiting for my boss. And, it goes all the way up the chain of command. Then I got to go sit down with the second in command in the DA's office. I got to explain to him everything that happened. I had to get a lawyer.
Holy shit.
But when we went to court, I was actually in E-cab on the second floor, and the summons part was in 100 Center Street. Now it's over on 346 Broadway. The summons part.
Did they make you wear one of those zebra outfits when you went to court?
Orange is the new black. Orange is the new black.
Hey, that's Dan Bibb in that zebra outfit.
So I had to go to court with my lawyer, who I'm still friends with. And, the attorney moves for an ACD, and the judge just looks at the back of the ticket and goes, this ticket is insufficient. It's dismissed. Goodbye.
Wow.
So I walked out of the Summons Park courtroom, back into ECAB, and started writing cases up again. So that was a little bit of a black mark.
But it really was nothing, though. But I guess they counted it against you.
Everything like when you paint the picture for me, and I always see the scenes. That's a cool scene for your show.
So with every big murder case I try, I expect that there's going to be a phone call from Bob Morgenthau saying, Dan, come up to the office. And, we want to, and it was a title. It really wasn't, there was no money with it. It wasn't a promotion, but it was, in an office of 500 attorneys, there are maybe 20, 25 senior trial counsel.
How many do you have under you?
I'm sorry?
Don't you have subordinates under you?
No, I was never anybody's boss, thank God.
But you get an assistant, though, or you get.
Well, you always have paralegal that works for you, and there's usually when we started the Cold Case Unit in '96, it was me, Steve Sirocco, and a paralegal, and we had the occasional use of an investigator, but mostly it was just the detectives that we work with. But God forbid, they never made me a boss of anything because they knew I could barely be boss of myself. So, it was either after the bank robbery trial or the first cold case. I think it was after the bank robbery trial. I got the phone call that, the boss is going to, you go up and
Senior Trial Counsel.
You go into the inner sanctum. Morgenthau's office, and he says, Dan, I'm going to make you senior trial counsel. And you say, thanks, boss. Appreciate it. As I walked out the door, I said, about time. I didn't say it.
But something, you can't be anywhere else in the world with bigger cases or more exciting cases than in Manhattan. The Big Apple. You're a fucking big cheese in the, most prestigious DA's office probably in the country.
You're right. And I'll tell you a funny story. I actually was contacted by the Essex County Prosecutor's Office to come in to interview for their first assistant prosecutor's position. And when I got there, I walked into the office. It was 5:30, 6 o'clock in the evening, and I'm expecting to meet, I can't remember his name, but the prosecutor for the county. And I walk in, and I sit down with a guy that I don't know, and I said, I thought I was meeting Mr. So-and-so, the prosecutor, to interview for the first assistant's job. He goes, well, Dan, the first assistant's job has been filled, but we wanted you to come over to interview you to try murder cases here in Essex County. I looked at him and I said, I try murder cases in the biggest city in the world. Why would I ever want to come here to try murder cases? I already do it in a place must were prestigious. I came here to interview for a boss position. And I turned around, walked out the door.
Out, yeah.
Hey, let me ask you a question. Would you practice your jury selection or summation or your closing statements at home the way, like the way I used to when I was a comedian, just in a room by myself? Are you talking to yourself? Do you do it for people?
I never did it.
No?
Ever.
So
But
you
obviously you wrote it down, right?
Everything, yes.
You wrote it down. So
Opening
you
statements.
never stood up there with the
summations.
with the yellow pad and just start reading it? Ladies and gentlemen of the jury.
It was
Your
never
Honor.
read. Nothing was ever read. It was all notes. It was all bullet points. The longest trials, let's see, the doctor trial, my summation was 3 hours.
Wow, that's a long one.
The bank robbery trial, my summation was 3 hours. And when you have a lot of evidence to marshal, you've really got to spend some time. But no,
it's
I
amazing.
never practiced them.
Mm-hmm.
Although my wife would want me to. She would say something, I don't want you to say anything stupid.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes I would ask my wife, what if I said something stupid, what would make you think you knew that I was saying something stupid?
But isn't it
And
amazing?
she would always come back, because I'm smarter than you are.
Mm-hmm.
But Dan, isn't it amazing how just a bullet point can lead you on 10 or 15 minutes of talking, right?
Yeah.
But when you're doing these closing arguments and, you were really you're trying to get at the heart of the jury, really let them know how evil this person is or whatever. And sometimes, inflection, the way you say, you're saying your thing, because you see it on TV and in the movies all the time where you get these it's usually defense attorneys that are very animated. So I would imagine that prosecutors can be that way too.
Absolutely, they are. I tried some heavy cases against some pretty animated defense attorneys.
Who were like the best ones at it? Like really full of shit. You knew they were full of shit, but they were getting it over on the jury.
The guy I thought who was one of the best trial attorneys I tried cases against was a guy by the name of Tom Klein. He's the guy I tried my first misdemeanor case with. I tried a couple of murder cases. He worked with legal aid for years. I think he still probably is with legal aid. I tried a couple of murder cases with him. I won one. I think I tried 2 of them with him.
They don't make any money legal aid, right?
No, they
To
don't.
stay in legal aid for all those years.
And to be that good, too. You can make money.
That's amazing.
There were some other guys that I started with, a guy by the name of Jeremy Schneider. I tried a murder case to a tie with him. The guy was convicted of Man 2, which might very well have been the correct verdict. He was very good. Another guy by the name of David Stern. These are all legal aid guys. Schneider and Stern have long since gone from legal aid. But David Stern, if I got jammed up, David Stern would be on my short list of guys that I would call. I mean, he was that good. I tried a murder case against him, conviction.
Do these guys who work legal aid also have their own practice, or are they
No.
exclusive legal
They're
aid?
exclusively legal aid. They're full-time employees.
Wow.
How about,
That's a definite-
how about the hired guns, the big priced attorneys? Who was the best of those? Who would you say was?
I don't know. I didn't. Keep in mind that most of the homicides that I tried they're 18B lawyers. They're on a panel and
Right.
they just get picked. And some are better than others. There are a few that are very good and a few that are not so good. I tried 3 murder cases against Nicky Barnes' lawyer, David Breitbart. Besides being one of the most obnoxious human beings in the world, and actually called me a Nazi in court one time. Breitbart's a very good lawyer. He's very animated. He knows what he's doing. I tried 3
What was the Breitbart's name?
David Breitbart.
I used to be his doorman before I became a cop.
No way.
So he was good, huh?
Yeah, he was good.
Yeah.
Well, he got Nicky Barnes off 3 murder trials, and when
He's a good
Nicky
tipper.
lost, when Nicky lost, Nicky fired David and went with somebody else, and then Nicky went straight to the feds and confessed his soul that he had actually killed all the people that he was acquitted of those homicides. But I tried 3 murder cases. I was 3-0-1. I had 1 hung jury, and then tried that guy again to a conviction. And I tried the 13th precinct, my first cold case against him to a conviction, and then tried another drug ripoff. The guy who was his client was an acolyte of Nicky Barnes. He was a kid acolyte of Nicky Barnes when Nicky was at the top of his game. And all those guys are still in jail. No, I'm sorry. One of the guys is out, but the 2 other guys are still in jail. And I do check every once in a while to see if people that I put in jail for life are still there. Although frighteningly so, besides releasing cop killers, the New York State Parole Board is releasing other killers as well.
That's a big thing right now, releasing the cop killers.
The bank robbery guys, they were convicted of murder and got 22 to life. They're both out. My first cold case, they stabbed the guy, cut his penis off, and fried it in a frying pan, flushed it down the toilet.
Wait. We can't just skim over that. What happened here?
Skim over that.
2 guys picked up a gay guy in a gym, took him back to his apartment. They robbed him, stabbed him, strangled him, cut his penis off, fried it up in a frying pan, flushed it down the toilet. And they took...
Why not just flush it down the... Why do you got to fry it up for?
I don't know, but the crime scene photographs, there's a frying pan on the stove with liquid in it.
You can't make shit like that up.
So that guy's out.
Horrible, man.
That guy's out.
Those 2 guys that cut off that guy's penis are out? One of them, anyway?
One of them's dead. One of them cooperated with me. One of them was suffering from full-blown AIDS at the time, cooperated with me, and testified in a 7-hour conditional exam. And then about 6 months before the case went to trial, he passed away. So it was big news because it was, this gay guy who was
You should know that this guy's
killed.
out in the street. You don't want to bump into that guy by accident.
Viciously killed, and the main witness is reaching out from the grave to touch this guy. Those were the stories that ran in the Times, Newsday, Post. He was convicted, got 25, and did 26. He was recently got out. The DA's office sometimes lets me know. I get phone calls from assistant DAs, and they'll tell me, hey, Billy Seals is out. That was the guy from the 13th Precinct penis case. I get a call. Billy Seals. Just want to let you know, Dan, Billy Seals got out. I want to let you know the bank robbery guys got out.
Right.
By the by, the bank robbery guys, thorough professionals. In the courtroom, gentlemen. Absolute gentlemen. But then there are guys, who are insane. I had a guy who killed 5 people. I tried. This is probably 98. And 98 the trial was. And this is one of the guys, he chopped up his brother with a circular saw after he shot him in the back of the head. He would come out and greet me every morning. Mr. Bibb, good morning. He'd come out of the pens in the back. Good morning, Mr. Bibb. How are you this morning? I'm good, Carmelo. How are you? Fine. Who's on deck for today? Who's coming? Dennis is coming today. Oh, my lawyer's going to eat Dennis alive. You know that. My lawyer's going to kill Dennis. Mm-hmm. Like, all right, Carmelo. All right. Every morning he'd come out of the pens. Good morning, Mr. Bibb. Cheery.
Dan, being on both sides of the fence.
He's doing 75 to life.
All right, good.
You obviously have these amazing cases from when you were a prosecutor, and now you're a defense attorney. And we're seeing a lot of, in criminal justice reform, some of the reform that we obviously don't like, cop killers being released. I'm against convicted felons voting. I think that's ridiculous, I think you've
now they want felons on juries.
Well, on juries too. Could you imagine, what is that called, the voir dire, when you pick? Yeah. Could you imagine any prosecutor saying, "Yeah, I'd like that felon. He's going to be a good."
That'll never happen.
Of course not. But where is this outrageous thinking coming from? It's outrageous.
The progressive left.
Yeah, I mean,
as a defense attorney, there are certain aspects of criminal justice reform that I am absolutely 100% in favor of. Paroling cop killers, letting them vote, and letting them serve on juries. That's not one of them.
Right.
For 24 years, I played the game of hide the bottle. Hide the bottle.
I used to play hide the salami.
Yeah. No comment.
No, when I was when I was the cop for those 20 years,
discretion was a better part of valor in that one.
The blue magnet. You go out there, you go out to the bars afterwards, and then try to find a girl to play Hadi Salami. I'm sorry I threw you off.
All right, but I was, and interestingly enough, Cy Vance, the present DA, who I started with in 1982. Has, before the primary and before the election, I actually met with him for breakfast twice. And I had been in the private sector for a few years. He wanted to know, first of all, what happened with the Palladium case, and then he also wanted to know what my thinking on what reforms could be placed in place to help the justice system improve. And I told him all about the Palladium case, and I told him, I said, the most important thing that you can do is don't hide the salami anymore. And he looked at me. I didn't put it like that. And I said, well, you can do discovery reform. I told him, I said, I'm practicing in New Jersey. I'm practicing criminal defense in New Jersey, which I've been doing since I left the office in 2006. And when you walk into a courtroom for arraignment on a complaint, really, there's a table or file cabinets with file drawers, and you, as a defense attorney, you go over and the file drawers will have letters on it, A through C, D through F, and you go over and you open the drawer, and there will be an envelope or a box or something there, and there will be all the police reports, all the discovery. And if there's electronic evidence, all you got to do is you walk over to the prosecutor's offices, or if they're in the same building, in Essex and a lot of other places they're in the same building, but Bergen they're in different. So you walk to the prosecutor's office, and they hand you whatever electronic evidence they have on disk or a thumb drive, and you write them a check, usually for a couple of bucks for the disks or a couple of bucks for the thumb drive, and you have just about everything that you need to defend a case the first day you walk into a courtroom. And I told Vance, I said, you should be doing that. And I remember what he told me. He said, Dan, at some point I'll be president of the DA's office, DA's association. I'll push for some reforms like that. And I looked at him, I said, you know what, Cy? You don't need to you don't need to be president of the DA's office to have discovery reform in New York. I said, every DA is their own elected official, and every DA can set policy. I said, when you take office, and this is especially the conversation I had with him after the primary, where he is going to be the DA.
Right.
I told him, I said, the day you put your hand up and put your hand on the Bible and swear to uphold the law and defend the Constitution of the United States and the states of New York, you can turn around and you can have ready a policy that deals with all of the eventualities about discovery. And you can adequately protect witnesses. You can adequately do things that will protect the public. But you can also do something that will level the playing field for the defense. Because after having been in the office for 24 and now in private practice for a few, I really saw in New York how unlevel the playing field was. And he said that was a great idea and that he would really think about, instituting a new discovery policy. Guess what? Never happened. The Manhattan DA's office today is more conservative on discovery than ever before. You get nothing from them until they are legally obligated to give it to you. Now, it's unlike the Brooklyn DA's office, where in many cases you get things straight out of the box. It will take a while. It will take a month or two, but you don't have to go through motions. You don't have to go through all this nonsense to try and force them to give you something that they don't have to give you yet.
Dan, just for 1 second, for our audience, discovery is evidence that all the evidence that the prosecution has, they have to turn it over to the defense at some point. So that's what discovery is.
Usually it happens before trial, right?
In New York, it's called Rosario material. They're really what you're looking for are witness statements. And in New York, actually, the law in the state of New York is that the prosecutor is not obligated to turn witness statements over until after the jury is sworn. At least in my last 10 years in the office, I took a liberal view of discovery, and I started giving it out probably a couple of months in advance of trial. And sometimes you'd get a plea as a result of it. And in New Jersey, where you have everything,
That's interesting.
all the witnesses' statements in front of you, I can have intelligent conversations with my clients well in advance of trial.
Right.
6, 8, 9 months before trial. I know what their case is.
So basically, we're talking about conviction rates. I would imagine what you're trying to say is that Manhattan is worried about conviction rates, so they don't give the discovery, or they hold it as long as possible in the hopes that
You're going to take a plea.
Yeah, but what you're saying is that you'd probably take a plea earlier if you could see that all these witness statements.
You're right. And you'd probably have less trials than you do now.
That's
because
interesting.
because any good defense attorney is going to tell you the more information you have, the better you can advise your client. Most of the time you're advising your client with blindfolds on. You're advising your client in the dark because you don't know what the witness statements are. And in police drug cases, why in the world would you withhold the statements of police officers in a drug case? You're doing nothing to advance the furtherance to advance the cause of justice. What do you think, somebody's going to threaten the cops because you turned over discovery on a drug case? And I recently, I don't do a lot of drug work, but if they can pay, I will. I defended a guy in Manhattan. And this is, they told me what the evidence was, but they weren't giving me anything. So right before trial, I'm begging the assistant. My client's pissed off because he thinks he's getting railroaded. So right before trial, I get fired because he thinks I'm not doing my job. And he hires somebody else, and same thing happens to her, but she ends up getting all the evidence right before trial. And the offer that was on the table when I was the attorney is now taken off the table. I would then offer to a lesser count and 2 years in prison. The offer now is the top count, and it's 4 years in prison. And of course, she gets the police reports, and she gets everything. And she calls me up and she says, "Holy shit, Dan, this guy's screwed." And now what's he going to do?
Right, he's fucked.
He's screwed because he had 2 years on the table, which had he known what the evidence was, he would have taken. Mm-hmm. Sometimes I have people look at me. I have non-law enforcement professional people look at me and says, "Well, your guy knows if he did it or not." And I said, "No, that's not the point.
Right.
Yeah.
The point is the fairness of the criminal justice system. It's not whether he did it or not. It is give me the things that I can show my client that he did it." I had a $1.8 million fraud in the state of New Jersey. Before the guy was even arrested, I got a call from the assistant attorney general. "Come down to Trenton. We'll give you everything we got." I got a huge box and a stack of DVDs with with the evidence on it. And there was an offer. There was going to be an offer made. And it was going to be a substantial offer and a $1.8 million fraud, as you would think. But my guy is in denial. And he's telling me, I'm going to trial. This is, screw them. That guy stole $1.8 million from his clients, and he did it in a somewhat sophisticated way, but rudimentary enough that, even me, a non-white collar guy, when I went through it, I go, ho, you're screwed. And when I sat down with him and we went through it all, sat in front of a computer for like 8 hours, total of about 10 hours with him, he came to Jesus. He had a moment and said, "I'm screwed, Dan. What do I do?" So, well, guess what? Next week they're going to tell me what the offer is. I'll try and negotiate it down a little bit, but you're going to take it because otherwise you're going to be doing 10, 12 years. And it was a 5-year offer, and we ended up getting him down to 4, and he did 2.5.
Was this a federal case?
No, it was a state attorney general case.
Oh, okay. Well, but how about, Dan, with the where with some discovery witnesses are being outed and possibly endangered? What can't the
In the new law, there's a provision that the DA's office can seek, in appropriate cases, protective order. And judges, I believe, will grant them. I did that when I was in the Manhattan DA's office. I had protective orders, 2 trials. One guy killed 6 people, one guy killed 5. In 2 trials, I had protective orders on all the witness statements until the night before they testified.
Right.
In appropriate cases, there is a mechanism for people to protect witnesses. But in New Jersey, recently had a conversation with a deputy chief of the trial division in Manhattan, and I told him about practicing in New Jersey, and he goes, "Oh, Jesus, Dan, aren't witnesses being intimidated and killed and everything?" And I said, "Matter of fact, no." I said, because in appropriate cases, judges do liberally grant protective orders.
Right.
So there's a mechanism in place. The new law takes effect January 1st. I mean, I haven't defended a murder case, so I don't know what stance they're going to take. But listen, in 1990, after we extradited a guy back from Ohio for a homicide, he had a witness killed from jail. But he had a witness killed because he knew who the witness was.
Right.
And not because he had any witness statements, or not because he knew who they were. They were in a drug gang together, and the defendant killed his drug boss right in front of 3 other guys who he worked with.
I mean, look, even you look at the police department has that DD5 system, the complaint follow-up system, where there has to be a level of security to that. Or else, you could go look up your brother's case in Brooklyn and know what they're going to do, or know what evidence they have against the relative.
I want to see if the computerized system that they have now has been hacked.
Well, something I never thought the security was where everyone could look at it. You know what I mean? Now, of course, if you look at it, your name is that you signed into the computer. But there's probably a lot of people that shouldn't be reading those fives,
I don't disagree with you, but a defense attorney isn't one of them.
Right.
Defense attorneys have ethics. Save a former federal prosecutor in New Jersey who's doing life for passing information onto his drug clients and getting people killed. By and large, you're going to give a defense attorney discovery with names and addresses of witnesses, which they do in New Jersey. Defense attorneys, the first thing he's not going to do is go to his client. If his client's accused of a violent crime, he's not going to go to his client and say, "Oh, hey, here's the witness statements. Knock yourself out. Right. Mm-hmm. And here's their addresses and phone numbers. Knock yourself out." If I'm defending a violent crime, which I don't do very often, the last thing I'm going to do, I'm going to give my client all of the witnesses' statements, but I'm going to take out their addresses and phone numbers, because the last thing I want is my client doing something stupid.
Right.
They've already done something stupid. They're indicted for a crime. The last thing I want is my client doing something more stupid and getting, threatening a witness and getting bail revoked and going right to jail. So, when I get discovery from prosecutors' offices, I give everything to my client, but I will take witness names, addresses, and phone numbers out, because there's no need for them to know that.
So what are most of your cases now?
They range anywhere from, done quite a few sex crimes, a lot of misdemeanor cases. I actually interviewed at the U.S. Attorney's Office, and one of the guys in Brooklyn, one of the guys I interviewed with, looked at me and says, "Well, Dan, what if you went, you've tried some of the heaviest cases in Manhattan. What if you went to trying drug cases here in Brooklyn?" I looked at him and I laughed and I said, my last trial was a misdemeanor assault case in Hillsdale, New Jersey. So, I've already been brought low. So don't even tell me. I said, trying a 20-kilo drug case would be a step up from a misdemeanor assault case in New Jersey.
I would imagine, though, having a lawyer that was once a prosecutor is a benefit.
I think it is.
And that's why I'm going to ask you, do you have a card?
No, you know what? I didn't.
Not that I hope I never have to use it.
I usually always have cards in my pocket or cards in my bag. They're sitting on a table in my office at home.
Now, Dan, this might be a stupid question, but did you have to take the bar in New Jersey too?
Yeah, it's the bar exam is a 2-day test. New Jersey adds a day. So when I took the bar exam, there are essay tests for each. And there's what's called a multi-state exam, which is a multiple choice exam. And in New York, because you got a lot of people taking both of the tests, the New York essay is 1 day, the multi-state test is the next day, and the New Jersey essay is the next day. So instead of 2 days, I had 3 days of torture.
Did you actually have to go back and study again, or what?
Yes. Actually, when I was studying for the bar exam, it was about 7 weeks before when I got out of school to the test. And I studied 6 days a week, took Saturday night and Sundays off. And
Just to go see how that pub was?
Any pub would do.
What was the name of
Any
that
pub
place?
would do. As a matter of fact, at the time I was living in West Orange, New Jersey, and it was a little bar, really hole-in-the-wall bar called Brennan's, where I would spend most of my Saturday nights and Sunday afternoons. But yeah, and for about a month there, my father worked in Manhattan. I was taking a bar review course at Town Hall, and my father worked on 53rd and 6th. And for a month, my parents were in Europe. So I would stay at my girlfriend's house on the Upper West Side, commute down to my father's office, spend 8 to 9 hours studying. And then I'd go to a bar review course from 6 to 10 at night, and then repeat the next day. And there were a couple of classes on Saturdays where it'd be 3 or 4 hours on Saturdays. So yeah, I didn't have much of a social life for 7 weeks of studying for the bar
when you
exam.
became a defense attorney.
No.
You didn't have to take the Jersey bar exam.
I had already taken it.
Oh, okay. I wasn't aware of that.
I took it back in '82.
Oh, so that was smart.
Yeah.
They added that extra day.
I knew I was going to be practicing in New York, but who knows what the future was going to hold.
Right, exactly. How's law different to practice in New Jersey as opposed to New York? What are the differences?
Well, I mean, one of the big differences I just told you about is discovery. None of the prosecutor's offices are as big as any of the DA's office in the city. When I was a prosecutor, there were very few defense attorneys that I did not get along with, and I find that as a defense attorney, there are very few prosecutors I don't get along with. A lot of times because they know where I've come from.
Right.
But also too, I mean, you're lawyers. At the end of the day, you're lawyers, and you have lives, and this is what you do for work. It's almost like a game in a way, I mean, it's a game with people's lives, but still, you shouldn't. This is the difference between the time that we're living in right now. You can't have a discussion with anybody without them being your enemy. They can't. There's no logical. There's no.
If you disagree with them, you mean?
Well, yeah. I mean, at the end of, like you said, you go have a beer. At the end of the day, you're both lawyers.
I mean, I agree with you, and there are a couple of prosecutors in the Manhattan DA's office who I think shouldn't be. Because of their attitude toward defense attorneys. They think we're trying to get something over on them. They think we are the enemy. People say, well, how can you represent people who do those things? And I say, well, I don't represent their crimes. I said, I'm not vouching for them as people. I said, my job as a defense attorney is to make sure that in any given case that the DA's office has the evidence to show that my client committed a crime. And if they do, my job is to mitigate that. My job is to, and I tell this to a lot of my friends these days, most of the time, my job is a lobbyist. That my job is I meet with prosecutors and either try and convince them that they're wrong in their interpretation of the evidence.
Politicking. In a way.
Politicking in a way, mostly lobbying, because, I mean, I've had one of the first cases that I had when I went into solo practice was a kid accused of a couple of rapes up in Orange County, and the kid was absolutely 100% wrongly accused by 2 women of having raped him. And I would have tried the case. I was ready to try the case. I think that ultimately, we interviewed all of the witnesses. I hired Johnny McAndrews, retired out of Manhattan North Homicide Squad, as my investigator. Johnny Mac interviewed just about all of the witnesses that this woman talked to both before and after she had sex with this guy. And both of them not only bragged about they were going to have sex with him, but bragged about it afterwards. And this is after the guy's already been charged. He's already been indicted. And the DA's office hadn't even spoken to any of her friends about
What was their
any
motive?
of this.
Their motive.
Far be it from me to ascribe motive to somebody.
Payback?
I don't know.
For nothing?
I don't know. I don't know what their motive was.
Did he have money, this guy?
No. I mean, his parents had enough money to pay me.
Well, Dan, how about even the assumption these days with the politics behind some of these rape cases with #MeToo that women are always telling the truth? And if you've ever investigated a sex crime, you know that we've spoken to sex crime detectives. I've gone out with numerous on sex cases that many times the complainant is lying. A high percentage in sex crimes. And they would have social service agencies saying, oh, no, it's the lowest of any crime. And that happens to be false.
The Me Too movement is the worst thing that happened to anybody who's going to be accused of a sex crimes. I've tried 2 sex crimes, 3 actually, since the Me Too movement really came to the forefront. 2 guys were convicted, 1 guy was acquitted. And it is problematic that you've got to address all of this in jury selection. Instead of actually trying to get at people's true attitudes towards criminal justice and whether they can give your client a fair trial, you've got to address Me Too.
Right.
And you've got to address the assumption that the Me Too movement wants to set in place that everybody's telling the truth all the time.
During jury selection, can you look at some of the women there and almost just base solely on the way they look? Can you almost determine, like, I don't want her. She looks like a feminist. She looks like she's part of Me Too. I need as least few of those on my jury as possible.
The worry is not, because in New York, defense attorneys do get to speak to jurors. Mm-hmm. In New Jersey and federally, the judge does everything. So you're allowed to probe. So, I've never made a judgment of anybody, whether they're...
Can you look at their social media pages?
No. You're picking a jury, you're going by what they're telling you. Mm-hmm. You're not, unless it's a questionnaire case.
Would you be okay with that? If that became part of this, jury
looking
selection?
At social media pages? I think if you were allowed to, more people would tell the truth. Voir dire means to speak the truth.
The jury I'm talking about, selecting the jury. You think they lie when they go give their statements for the jury?
I think some do. I couldn't even tell you how prevalent it is. But I have no doubt that in 1 or more of the cases that that recently tried that were convictions, there were people that I left on a jury that could very well have been lying to me. I don't know, because you don't get to see their social media pages. You don't get anything.
Are they lying to you because they want to be part of the jury?
Most of them lie to you because they want to be off the jury.
Really? Okay. I don't like that, by the way. Whenever I hear somebody telling me, I said this when I went to the jury, I can't be on it because I'm racist, or I can't be on it because of this and
I don't want. Here's the thing.
It's your civic duty.
I agree with you. It's your civic duty. But if somebody's going to do that,
then you don't want them.
I don't want them anyway.
Right. Yeah.
I went as a defense attorney or a prosecutor. I don't want anybody that's willing to lie in court and then admit it out of court. Well, yeah, I lied to get out of jury duty. I've been called for jury duty. John Hardigan was retired out of Manhattan North Homicide, went to the Bergen County Prosecutor's Office as an investigator. I got called to jury duty, and I called John. I said, "Hey, John, I'm coming for jury duty. You want to have lunch?" He goes, "Yeah, there really aren't a hell of a lot of lunch options in Hackensack, New Jersey." But I hadn't seen John in a while. We'd done a couple of cases together, and I got called. The morning I got called for a jury panel, and I get in there and said, "Mr. Bibb, what do you do for a living?" I said, "I'm in the Manhattan DA's office. Been in the Manhattan DA's office for X number of years. I prosecute murder cases, cold case homicides, blah, blah, blah." Told them all my background and everything. "Do you think you could be fair and impartial?" 100%. Absolutely, I could be fair and impartial. Of course, no defense attorney is ever going to take me.
No.
Mm-hmm. And no defense attorney, I don't think, neither a defense attorney nor a prosecutor would take me today because I've done both. Mm-hmm. And, if the emperor has no clothes, I think I'm probably the one that could see that the emperor has no clothes before any non, law enforcement professional. But, and I told him, I told the judge, as a matter of fact, there's an investigator who's a very good friend of mine, and in about an hour, I'm going to have lunch with him. So, the judge just looks at both of the attorneys and goes, "Why don't we just let Mr. Bibb go?"
Are there a lot of lawyers like you that, flip, switch?
Yeah.
It happens a lot?
Yeah, it happens all the time.
And that's to make money at some point?
Well, I left because of a case.
Yeah, let's get to that. Let's
I
talk
didn't leave
about
because
that.
I didn't
As much
I
as
didn't
you
leave.
can, as much as you can share, you want to share.
Sure.
You were having this run with the DA's office in the time
was
of
a
your
great
life,
run.
right?
It was a great
You
run.
loved it, right?
Loved every minute of it.
And then you bumped
Best job a lawyer could ever had.
You went head on into a case that changed your mind, your opinion a little bit, right? What was that case?
In Thanksgiving night of 1990, at the Palladium nightclub, there was a
Which
bouncer.
is a good club, by the way.
Never went there.
I went there.
Never went there. There was a bouncer who was shot and killed. And a friend of mine, Steve Sirocco, picked up the case and eventually tried two guys, one of whom, by the by, had made admissions to his girlfriend that he had been involved. Of course, admissions that I thought were ultimately false because he was just being a braggart and an idiot. And another guy from Washington Heights was also tried, convicted, and sentenced to 25 to life.
Were they friends?
They didn't know each other.
But somehow the two of them were supposed to get involved and kill this bouncer.
Right. So they were tried, convicted, 25 to life. By the way, in front of one of the most liberal judges in the system, a guy by the name of Jay Gold. So that was they were tried.
Why those two guys though? How did they even get put together?
The guy by the name of David Lemus was identified because David Lemus's girlfriend had confided in a friend of hers that David had admitted to her to being involved in the homicide. Unfortunately, for Lemus, although admitting to being there and admitting to be a gunman in the homicide, he got most of the underlying facts wrong. But Lemus is picked up based on that admission. He's put in a lineup, and he's identified by 4 witnesses. Not a bad case, you would think, right? You have admissions to a person close to him. You have 4 eyewitness identifications.
Yeah, that's good enough for me.
Now, the second guy, there was a detective in the 3-4 precinct whose name escapes me, and wasn't a big fan back in the day. But what he tells Steve is that an informant of his comes to him and says that this guy, a guy by the name of Olmedo Hidalgo, was involved in the Palladium homicide. So Hidalgo had been arrested a couple of times for nonsense, and it was actually being looked at for a number of drug ripoffs. Apartment invasion, home invasion, but they were drug ripoffs.
Right.
And they had his picture, and they put his picture, and he gets identified by 4 witnesses.
Same 4 witnesses that identified the other guy? 2
of the same and 2 different. So you got 4. You got 4
And this is based
IDs.
off a photo array or a lineup?
Lineup. So you got first initially photo array lineup for Lemus. There were no photo arrays, if my recollection is correct. They did a photo array with Hidalgo, and he was identified, and then they picked him up, and he was again identified in the lineup. So they go to trial. Not a bad case back in the 90s. You got multiple witness identifications. How could it be that 4 people are mistaken on 2 different guys, especially since one of the guys makes admissions that he was there and involved? Well, 95, the U.S. Attorney's Office brings a witness by the name of Joey Palat to the attention of Steve Sirocco. And Steve does an investigation. And Palat basically says that he and a guy by the name of Spanky, I can't remember his real name right now. He and
From the Little Rascals? He must have been really old.
From the Bronx. So he says Joey's a member of a gang called CNC, which were out of the 139 in Brook. Very bad area back in the day. Yeah. Huge
drug spot.
Huge drug spots all over the place there. And CNC ran the neighborhood, basically. It was Jose Calderon and Couson, whose name was Jose Padilla. They killed people at the drop of a hat. You looked at them wrong. They tortured and murdered a guy and his girlfriend who were there buying drugs because they thought they ripped something off. They tortured him, they tortured him for a while, then put him in the back of a box truck and shot him to death. So these were really bad guys. And Joey says that he was at the Palladium with Spanky, Richie, and Peachy. And Joey tells a story, of course, leaving himself out. Mm-hmm. He's not involved. So problem here is Joey tells three different stories of what he did and what everybody else did.
Why is he telling this story? Is he trying to get off on something?
Yeah, the feds have them on RICO, drugs, life, and Joey wants to be a cooperator, and Joey's singing for his life. The problem is that Joey lies repeatedly, and he tells three different stories. Well, they end up getting a little bit more, and they end up doing a motion. The defense attorneys do a motion to set aside the verdict. They do a hearing. And Steve thought that at the time, this is probably in 96, that the judge, Jay Golden, was going to set aside the verdict. Well, he didn't. Segue to 2002.
What does that mean, set aside the verdict?
Means vacate the convictions and order.
So after they got tried and they got found guilty, they're doing time,
right.
And you find out this new evidence, and you think that the judge is going to, when he produces this new evidence, they're going to let these guys out.
Well, grant them a new trial at least.
Okay, yeah, all right. And
so,
but he didn't.
He didn't. He denied the motion.
Why?
And, there was an opinion which he said that he didn't believe Palat. He didn't believe Joey Palat. So, segue to 2002, when a guy, Richie, is now being prosecuted by the Southern District of Feds. And he comes forward and he gives a story that, of course, exculpates himself, but implicates Joey, Spanky, and Peachy. So Steve meets with these two Bronx homicide detectives, Bobby Alvarado and John Schwartz, and I meet with them as well. And we say, we're going to open up a new investigation. Spanky's getting out of federal prison. They're threatening to go arrest him up in Minnesota where he is in prison and bring him back. And we actually had to call the chief of detectives office and say, call this guy off. He can't go to Minnesota and arrest the guy on a Manhattan homicide. He can't, That's what he's threatening to do. He's out of his jurisdiction. So a new investigation begins. My partner, Steve Sirocco, is retiring in April of 2003. And, of course, I begin the investigation with him. We go down to Ferreton Federal Corrections. We interview Richie Feliciano. Richie Feliciano is obviously lying about his own involvement because Joey has put him in the mix back in 95. But he says, I wasn't involved. I was just there, and these other guys did it. Which sets me on a 2-year investigation through, I don't know, I remember how many, 14 federal prisons, 28 states, interviewing witnesses. Everybody that was prosecuted with CNC, it was about 20
And just because you wanted to make this right, you wanted to make sure that the two guys that are sitting in prison should be there.
Right. Either should or shouldn't.
Yeah, it shouldn't. It was on your conscience.
And it, step by step, and witness by witness, I started to become convinced that these two guys were likely not guilty. Not saying innocent, I'm saying not guilty. That they shouldn't be in jail. That there is enough doubt there about who did this, that these two guys shouldn't be sitting in jail. I eventually came to the conclusion that Richie, Peachy, Spanky, and Joey were all four involved, and that David Lemus and Olmedo Hidalgo were not involved. One of the things that pushed me over the edge was Spanky's brother. Now, Spanky's brother was married to a woman from from Texas. They were in the Army from Texas. He was in Fort Bliss, down in South Texas, and met this girl, marries her, moves her back to the South Bronx. Imagine the shock of this woman of going from South Texas to the South Bronx. Oh, my God. And what happens is...
It's not, we're moving on up. No, it's the opposite of that.
She didn't know what a bodega was.
Her husband gets activated for Desert Shield.
Now she's there by herself.
And now she's there by herself with his family and Spanky. And Spanky tries to rape her. And while he tries to rape her, he evidently tells her about him being involved in, all these gun shit and everything. And she gets away. She flees to she reports it to the police, but she leaves for South Texas. She goes back to Texas, awaiting her husband's return from Desert Storm, which eventually comes Desert Storm. But when the Army finds out that she was an attempted rape victim and that they actually ship him home to be with her, which I found crazily odd, but the Army did the right thing. Sends him home to South Texas, and he tells her of Spanky's involvement in the Palladium. Now, we didn't know what she knew about Spanky's involvement in the Palladium, but by this time she is a Border Patrol agent in Tucson. So we fly to Tucson and we speak to her, and we're like, oh my God, this is huge. Spanky's brother knows about his involvement in the Palladium. So, of course, we leave South Texas and we fly and we immediately try and locate him. Now, he's a legit citizen. Never been involved in drugs. Never, grew up in one of the worst neighborhoods in the Bronx. Never touched drugs. Never touched anything. He's the head maintenance man at the Jewish Theological Cemetery in Upper Manhattan. Mm-hmm. I mean, he's a legit citizen. Yeah. He is about as legit as you get if coming out of the South Bronx. So we get hold of him. Carlos Rodriguez, one of the detectives, gets a hold of him and starts talking to him on the phone, trying to convince him to talk to us. And one day, Carlos calls me up and says, I just got off the phone with Spanky's brother, and he's a little bit cocktailed up. And he's willing to talk. So we actually set an interview for, I think it was that Friday. Now, it turns out that Carlos was getting married that day. So I said, we can postpone this because you're not getting married at City Hall. My buddy Mark Embrick, the judge, is going to marry you. So we postpone the interview to him. We call him up, tell him to come in Monday, and he comes in on Monday. And he immediately opens up. He says, the night before, on Thanksgiving night, we're all planning to have Thanksgiving dinner. And Joey, Peachy, Richie, and Spanky show up at his apartment or one of the relatives' apartments. And they're trying to get him to go with them to the Palladium. And he says, no, absolutely not. It's Thanksgiving. I'm not going to the Palladium. And they're driving a car that witnesses to the shooting say they see fleeing the scene after the shooting. I can't remember what it was. It was a blue Impala or a blue four-door sedan. And he says that the next morning, Spanky shows up at his apartment and regales him with a story of him being in the club, asking to go out and come back in, which was against the security rules. You can't leave and come back, or if you want to come back, it's another $20. So Spanky gets pissed, gets in a fight with one of the bouncers, and gets bounced out of the club. One of the guys, I can't remember which of the four guys, comes out. Oh, Richie comes out and sees that Spanky's he's bounced out of the club. Richie says, I leave, I go back in, I get the other two guys, we go down to the car, we get our guns, and we go back. And Richie's not armed, but performs a job in that he's distracting some of the bouncers. Spanky's the eventual shooter. Joey is armed with a 9.
He's starting to fight with the bouncers. The other guy's trying to, hey, fuck you.
Yeah.
This, that, and the other.
Spanky's armed with a 9 that ends up jamming. Spanky's got a revolver. And Peachy, this is going back a long time. Peachy was involved. I can't remember exactly what he did. And what happens is the guy who had bounced Spanky out of the bar is now inside. So there's 3 or 4 bouncers outside that had nothing to do with throwing him out.
Always happens.
But he then they pull their guns. Joey's gun jams. And Spanky gets off 4 or 5 rounds, hits the chief of security in the leg, and hits another bouncer twice in the chest. And he goes out. And the 3 of us stood there sat there looking at each other like, holy shit. David Lemus, one of the people convicted after trial, was identified as the person who was thrown out of the club and comes back with the revolver and does the shooting. I've been doing this a long time by then, 20 years, and I know it's really difficult to have two people doing the same thing during the exact same thing during a crime. Spanky's brother, whose name again escapes me, really pushed me over the edge about Lemus and Hidalgo being involved. There were 4 people involved. I know who they are. David Lemus and Olmedo Hidalgo were not them. David Lemus may very well have been there, but he was not involved.
Could have very easily been walking out of the club and watched the shooting go down.
So Dan, the big issue is that you know this now, and you went to your boss and told him that you wanted these guys to be released from prison, right? But the Manhattan DA's office still wanted to go with it. They didn't want to go against.
There's things that I can't discuss, because of attorney-client privilege, and since 2006 when I left the DA's office, I've talked about this a lot. People want to know about it. People want to know what happened. But there's attorney-client privilege there that I have never violated and won't violate. I know that, people think I'm crazy, but, it's just something I won't do. What ended up happening is, when I can tell you a couple of things, that when I expressed my belief, it was told to me that they would have somebody else assigned to me if it came to do a hearing. That never happened until approximately the last week in March of 2005.
What do you mean assigned to you?
Well, there would be another assistant DA who would take over the case if they decided to go to a hearing and defend the convictions. That another assistant DA would do the hearing.
Defend the convictions.
Right. And that's what you're doing at a hearing. Bob Morgenthau eventually came out with a letter to the press after I went public saying that the hearing was done to determine what the evidence was. I still maintain a ton of respect for Robert Morgenthau. I never did a trial or a hearing to determine what the facts were. I already knew what the facts were.
Right.
I didn't just throw witnesses on the stand for a jury to make a decision. When I prosecuted a guy, it was because I made a determination that I could prove this guy's guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. Did I have my share of acquittals? Yeah. If you didn't have your share of acquittals, you weren't trying tough cases. You weren't making tough calls. If everything you had, and if all you wanted was the smoking gun, literally the smoking gun and a dozen eyewitnesses, fingerprints and DNA, then you weren't doing your job. You weren't trying the tough cases, and I was trying tough cases. And this hearing, was not done to determine what the evidence was. We knew what the evidence was. I knew what the evidence was. What I will tell you is this, is that in the last meeting before the hearing began, it was between me, Nancy Ryan, who was chief of the trial division, Robert Morgenthau, and Jim Kindler, who was first assistant DA. And I can't tell you what happened during the meeting or what was said during the meeting, but I'll let your imagination run wild. But at the end, when I expressed my disbelief that I was being forced to do something that I didn't believe in, I'll never forget what Jim Kindler told me, and this is a direct quote. I don't know whatever made you think you weren't going to do that hearing. And I looked at my boss, my direct boss, Nancy Ryan. I said she did a year ago when she told me she was going to assign somebody else to do the hearing if it came to it. So I ended up doing the hearing. I was unhappy, to say the least. I was determined that the right thing was going to happen. And as far as I was concerned, the right thing was these convictions were going to be set aside. With that in mind, keep in mind as well that neither of the attorneys on the case back in 1990 and 95 are the attorneys on the case now. They're a new counsel. They're doing a pro bono. They've never interviewed any of the witnesses, none of them. And I had, of course, interviewed every single one of them in person, oftentimes more than once. Now, we probably talked to Spanky's brother in person 5 or 6 times before this hearing. So what I did is before the hearing, I got all the witnesses in. I prepped them to testify as effectively as they could. I didn't coach witnesses. I didn't tell them what to say. I told them, tell me the truth. But I prepped him to testify. And one of the most important witnesses to testify at that hearing was Spanky's brother. Spanky's brother did it in a closed courtroom during the court. And the interesting thing is I think it was every witness that was called except for the detective who was assigned to the case back in 1990. They introduced themselves. The defense attorneys introduced themselves to the witness when they began cross-examination when they began their direct examination of the witness. They'd never seen them, never spoken to them, didn't know who they were.
Wow.
But yet they have to defend them.
Well, keep in mind, they're putting the witnesses on the stand. This is their burden. Mm-hmm. And, there was a guy, again, whose name escapes me, but he was a member of CNC and had killed 6 people himself by his own hand on orders from either Couson or Calderon. And he testified, and I basically asked him on cross-examination, so you killed 6 people? He said, yeah. That was it. I mean, I could have torn that guy up.
Right.
But that guy was an important witness as far as I was concerned for doing what was right. And I exaggerate a little bit. Yeah, I crossed him. And I asked him some about the homicides, but I could have taken him through those homicides. I could have had that guy on the stand for days on end, just talking about his own crimes. But it wouldn't have helped. And what helped was his testimony about what Spanky and Joey had told him the Friday after that Thanksgiving. And I mean, there were other witnesses. They ended up calling Joey Palat at the hearing, and I was so angry. I went to talk to Palat a couple of times in prison, and I was so angry at Palat for having lied repeatedly, when he was interviewed by the DA's office and then on the witness stand at the first hearing, that I made a determination if they called Palat that I would absolutely go to town on him. And I got to tell you, I had more fun cross-examining that guy than you could shake a stick at. But it was all for show because I didn't care if the judge believed Palat or not, because there was so much other evidence that Richie, Peachy, Spanky, and Joey were the perps and not David Lemus and Olmedo Hidalgo.
So, Dan, did you, after this, it's tremendous amount of integrity that you showed, did you have to resign, you think? If you hadn't, you would have been dead in that office? Or why did you resign?
No, when I was told I had to do the hearing, I figured I'll tell you another funny part of this whole thing is when I was told I had to do the hearing, and Kindler said that to me, I called a buddy of mine who's a civil engineer, knows about law enforcement, what I tell him. Okay, knows about the criminal justice system, what I tell him. So I said, listen, I just had the worst day at my office in my life. I need to drink. So we met at a bar about a mile from our house, and we ended up drinking 15-year-old Macallan, like the both of us, like a bottle and a half. And we actually had to call our wives to come and get us. And I remember the next morning going out with its monster hangover to go to work and saying, shit, where's my car? My wife says, don't you remember? Mm-hmm. And I'm like, she goes, it's at the bar, you moron. Mm-hmm. So, but while we're sitting there drinking, my buddy Mike, and I'll tell you, Mike Negri, shout out to you, brother. I'm going to tell you to listen to this. So when we're talking to my buddy Mike says to me, he goes, why don't you just lose? I looked at him and I said, what do you mean? Why don't I just lose? Because I figured I had 2 options: resign under protest, or do nothing, not go to the hearing, and get fired. And keep in mind, I got little kids at the time.
Right, absolutely.
I got a huge mortgage to pay, and there's no way I can quit. I can't resign because I need this job.
So you threw the game.
So I decided to throw it, and he goes, just lose. And I looked at him, I said, when I charge somebody with a crime or when I do something in a courtroom, man, I'm in there to win.
Yeah,
not today, I'm in there because I believe that what I'm doing is justice. I don't go in there. I charge a guy with a homicide because I believe he's guilty, and I threw this hearing because I believe these guys were not just not guilty; they were factually innocent and were not involved in that homicide. And to this day, I always, whenever I see him, which is nowhere near as often as it should be, I always tell him, I always thank him. I said, yo, bro, this was your idea, man. And he's like, I don't even remember that, man. We were so drunk. How can you remember that?
That's great, though.
From
That's
the
great.
mouths of drunks.
I'll tell you something.
Yes.
I'll tell you something. You know, while you were talking for the whole 2.5 hours, every time you were painting a picture, I could always see the scene. And I was mentioning earlier about your TV show that you should have, that should be based on you. You know what I'm saying? The former prosecutor turns into a defense attorney. These big cases, what let you there, you getting locked up for drunken shit, and a lot of
Discon.
But a lot of it, you know, it has the feeling of turns out a few good men, and it turns out you are one of the few good men that were out there. You basically you were caught between a rock and a hard place, and your drunk friend helped you out of it.
That one of the guys sued me.
For getting him off?
Yeah.
Fuck that guy, man.
The guy Hidalgo, they ended up, after the hearing, I said, I'm done, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Anyone, no more court appearances for me, nothing for me. I'm finished. Over. I want nothing to do with this case. You do what you're going to do from here. And the guy they had second seat the hearing, assistant DA, he signed the last minute, somebody basically to watch me. You know, he takes over. And, you know, he knew nothing about the case. So every day he's coming in and talking to me about the case. They're deciding what they're going to do. And, you know, finally they decide that they're going to consent to set aside Olmedo Hidalgo's conviction, but they're going to fight to save David Lemus's conviction.
Which makes no sense
Which makes no sense because most of the evidence that I gathered during the course of almost 2-year investigation went to Lemus's involvement, not Hidalgo's. Made no sense to me.
It doesn't.
And I even told him.
Sense.
I told him this makes no sense. I said most of the evidence says that goes against Lemus. Shows that Lemus didn't do it, not Hidalgo. But they're like, no, we'll set aside Hidalgo's, but we're going to go to save David Lemus. So of course the judge was a friend, Roger Hayes, still on the bench. I think he's leaving at the end of the year, which is a loss, by the way. He was actually chief of the trial division in 1982 when I started. But the judge, knew. I'm not going to say how, but he knew what my thinking was on the case, and he ends up setting aside Lemus's conviction, and they retried him.
Wow!
And he was swiftly acquitted. Hidalgo sued, but did not sue me, and the city ends up. Well, what happens now? Lemus is out. I mean, they set bail when he set aside the conviction, so he'd been out for a while. Now Lemus is acquitted, and Lemus is going to sue. And I get a call from his attorney, and he goes, we're suing the DA's office. And I said, well, okay. I said, listen, I just appreciate it if you don't sue the guy who got your guy out of jail.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a Saturday, and I run swim meets. All my kids were competitive swimmers. And I still do today, to this day. And I run swim meets for New Jersey Swimming. And that Saturday, I was running a swim meet. And this son of a bitch had federal marshals come up and serve my wife with a complaint, with a civil rights complaint. And I was absolutely livid. So, of course, I called him on Monday and call him every name in the book.
Oh, wow.
But, David Lemus sued me. Thanks, David.
Yeah, for getting them off.
Yeah, exactly.
You know what they say, no good deed goes unpunished.
Exactly.
There you go. That's a great way to end the show. I'm sorry that we ran out of time a while ago, but we had to finish listening to this story. That's a fantastic story. And at least you had, like I said, you're one of the few good men. You stuck your neck out for two people that were wrongfully convicted. He went the whole way with it, and then he got sued in the end. So it was nice knowing you, by the way. And if you need a place to stay, if you lose your house or whatever, Bill has this palatial estates. He's got extra rooms. His kids are out. They're in college.
It's my vacation spot.
Anyway, Dan, I want to thank you. I want to thank you so much.
Lemus got 1.1 million, and Hidalgo got 2.2.
Wow.
That's nothing.
Crime pays.
Yeah, but they didn't do the crime.
15 years. 15 years in jail.
Yeah, that's not worth it.
Nah.
Yeah, nowadays they get 120 million for... Anyway, thanks, Dan, for coming through.
It was great, man.
It was a pleasure having you here. And we tell all our guests, September 21st, we're going to have a comedy show, a podcast, a live podcast with a comedy show
Lucy's
afterwards.
in Pleasantville, yeah.
And we're going to be inviting all our past guests on to come in and be part of the live podcast, catch up with you. Everybody's going to get a couple of minutes to tell us what they're up to, and we'd love to have you for that.
Absolutely. Love to.
All right. On behalf of Bill, any parting words?
No, I'd like to thank Dan Bibb. He's our first non-police guest, and it was fascinating. I mean, he's not even drinking. Imagine if he was drinking, how many hours of stories he could tell.
Yeah,
not quite as many as Mike Sheehan.
We got to get Mike. I've been trying to get Mike in here. I can't. I don't have a phone number from him.
I do.
Yeah, I want to get it. I think he'd be great. I love Mike.
You guys will be here for a day.
You know what's funny? When you were telling me the drinking stories when you were young, I thought about Mike. I said, this is the kind of trouble Mike gets into too.
He was a guy who taught me a lot.
God bless him. He's a good man. I want his number.
Drank a lot with. I'll give it to you.
Alrighty. All right, thanks.
I'm in touch with him all the time.
Well, on behalf of Police Off the Cuff, man, thanks for tuning in, and we look forward to airing this.
Absolutely.
Let me know.
Over and out.
Wow.
Yeah, man, I've been trying to get in touch with Mike Sheehan. I used to coordinate the homicide.
Western